Hello and welcome to lecture number 8. This presentation will explore the way in which the national government took shape in the years following the ratification of the Constitution. The lecture will address many important themes. First, we'll investigate the history of several key institutions established during the presidency of George Washington, such as the makeup of the judicial branch, foundations of American foreign policy, and the emergence of political parties. We will also explore how the second president, John Adams, addressed opposition to war with France during his administration. A true spirit of cooperation was seen in the years following the ratification of the Constitution, as several institutions were established under the new government. One of the first orders of business was the election of a president. George Washington did not seek the office. However, in February of 1789, the Electoral College met and unanimously chose Washington to be the nation's first president. His vice president was John Adams. The image here depicts Washington's journey to the nation's temporary capital in New York City. Washington was the most admired man in 18th century America. Even before the Constitution was ratified, his name was widely proposed for the presidency. This painting captures the enthusiasm of the crowd gathered to see their hero take the oath of office. Because he served as the nation's first president, each step he took would serve as a model or precedent for those who would follow. One precedent set by Washington dealt with his cabinet, the president's most important set of advisors. He chose 4 individuals from different parts of the nation to lead the most important executive departments. Henry Knox, from Massachusetts, was named Secretary of War. Fellow Virginians Edmund Randolph and Thomas Jefferson were named Attorney General and Secretary of State. And from New York, Alexander Hamilton became the first Treasury Secretary. Jefferson and Hamilton were probably the leading members of Washington's cabinet. With the executive department addressed, Congress set to work on accomplishing 2 important tasks. The first was to organize the judiciary, and it did so with the Judiciary Act of 1789. First, the Judiciary Act established a 6-member United States Supreme Court. John Jay was nominated by President Washington and then confirmed by the Senate to become the nation's first Chief Justice. Secondly, it established 13 federal district courts, 1 for each state. Finally, it gave the Supreme Court the power to review decisions of the states, thereby reinforcing the fact that the Supreme Court was the highest court in the land. Another task for Congress was to pass a Bill of Rights. This had been promised by supporters of the Constitution to appease anti-federalists during the fight for ratification. Congress proposed several amendments, and 10 were adopted by the states and became part of the Constitution in 1791. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Their primary author was James Madison. Some have called the First Amendment the most important included in the Bill of Rights. It protected the rights of free speech, press, and religion. It also protected the right to peacefully assemble and to petition the government. The Second Amendment protected the right of the people to keep and bear arms, as many felt the nation had no need of a large standing army. Other important amendments prohibited unreasonable searches of people's homes and protected the rights of those accused of crimes by allowing for jury trials in some cases and barred cruel and unusual punishment. Still other amendments reserved power for the states and the people. Taken together, they're an important set of rights that serve to make the nation unique, even today. For more information about the Bill of Rights, you may click on the hyperlink below. As the workings of the government continued, Washington placed a great deal of confidence in Alexander Hamilton, his Secretary of the Treasury. Eventually, however, Hamilton's proposals proved to be controversial to some. Alexander Hamilton was born in the West Indies and came to live in New York in 1772. During the Revolutionary War, he served on Washington's staff and became quite close to the general. As Treasury Secretary, he hoped to shape the new nation's fiscal policies. This was first seen with the nation's debt. Hamilton hoped to concentrate the country's debt in the national government, so when prominent Americans invested heavily in the United States government, it would give them a stake in the success of the nation. During the Revolutionary War, the United States had acquired a debt of about $54 million. Hamilton proposed the United States pay off the foreign debt, and then the national government would assume the debt acquired by the states, therefore making them beholden to the national government. Several states with large debts, like Massachusetts, supported his proposals, but many others, several of which were from the South, like Virginia and Maryland, had already paid off their debt. It seemed as if his financial plans were doomed to failure in Congress until once again a compromise solution was reached. This took place following a meeting with Thomas Jefferson. Representatives from several southern states did not support assumption of state debt. They'd already paid theirs off and didn't want to fund the debts of other states. But they did want the nation's capital to be located in the South. So, they agreed to assumption in return for placing the new permanent location for the nation's capital in the South along the Potomac River in what is now Washington, D.C. Hamilton wasn't through with his fiscal proposals. He also supported the creation of a national bank. This would benefit the nation because it would allow the government a place to deposit tax revenues and help to regulate state banks. It also wouldn't cost taxpayers any money. Congress passed legislation creating the institution. However, there was one problem. Was the proposal allowed by the Constitution? Jefferson argued that no, the Constitution did not allow for the creation of a national bank because the Constitution did not specifically grant Congress the power to do so. This was a power strictly reserved to the states. In developing this line of thought, he espoused what came to be known as a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Hamilton countered with a different argument by offering a loose interpretation of the Constitution. He argued the Bank of the United States should be allowed because of the Constitution's Necessary and Proper Clause, or the Elastic Clause, which allowed Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper to carry out its functions. Washington agreed with Hamilton and signed legislation creating the Bank of the United States, granting the bank a charter for 20 years. One final item associated with Hamilton's policies resulted in the Whiskey Rebellion. To help raise revenues for the government, a tax of 7 cents per gallon was placed on the sale of whiskey. When crowds in western Pennsylvania protested the tax and intimidated tax collectors in actions reminiscent of the American Revolution, President Washington responded with surprising strength. He led a militia of 13,000 to disperse the rebels. This was important as it demonstrated the new government would not allow for violent resistance to its policies. We'll now explore issues of foreign policy during the era of the early republic. In 1789, revolution broke out in France. Many Americans, particularly Thomas Jefferson and his followers, rejoiced. However, it turned violent in the early 1790s, and the king himself was executed. As fighting broke out among the European nations, the United States was still bound to the French by a treaty first developed during the Revolution. Considerable pressure was placed on the nation to choose sides in this European war. The man shown here, Citizen Genet, was dispatched as a representative of the French government. The Americans received his diplomatic credentials, yet George Washington simultaneously issued a proclamation of neutrality in the European war, thereby invalidating the previous alliance with France. Relations with the British remained problematic. In defiance of the Treaty of Paris, British troops continued to occupy several forts in the Northwest Territory. There, they engaged in the fur trade and openly traded goods with Native Americans opposed to the United States. They also seized several American ships, along with their cargoes, and impressed sailors into service for the Royal Navy. Jeffersonians in particular were upset. To avoid war with the British, Washington sent Chief Justice John Jay to London. There he negotiated the terms of Jay's treaty, but was unfortunately unable to win many concessions. The British agreed to leave the military posts out west, and agreed to pay damages for the past seizure of American goods. However, they made no pledge to stop their actions in the future. Jay's treaty was very unpopular in the United States, especially among followers of Jefferson. He made no inroads into the American goal of protecting the trading rights of neutral nations during wartime. But he didn't have much to bargain with. Even though it was unpopular, it was important because it did avoid war at that time.